Thank you. On behalf of the Martens Center, I would like to welcome you all to this event. Where are we now and where are we going? That's two interesting issues. I will start with how did we get here? Because that's a very important part of the story, actually. The Helsinki Treaty contains 10 elements. The most important of them is, of course, that you are not allowed to change border with violence, but there are 9 others. All 10 elements in the Helsinki Treaty was actually violated by the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. All 10 of them, apart from all other agreements and treaties that was breached by the Russian aggression. And this is, of course, one important aspect when the Martens Center and the EPP take special interest in what happens in Ukraine and with the relationship with Russia. Because the whole European order of security is based on the principles in the Helsinki Treaty. If you violate these principles, you also violate the foundations for security, not only for Ukraine, but for all other European states as well, states and nations. And I'm quite sure it came as a surprise for many in this town, as for that sake also in Sweden, that the antagonistic relationship that we all knew were existing in the military planning in Moscow did also apply for the relationship with the EU. Until the serious discussion with Ukraine about the accession treaty, most people here thought that it was not a problem for the Russians that we had relationship with Ukraine and other post-Soviet republics, including actually Russia. What happened then, when the Ukrainian people got to the streets and said that we want to choose the European path? What happened then with the attitude that we saw from Kremlin and from Mr. Putin himself was, of course, a very, very severe escalation of a relationship, an antagonistic relationship with the EU. And we have to take this seriously. What was done in Crimea and what has been done in the southeast of Ukraine with the Russian aggression is something that is also of utmost importance for the rest of Europe and for the EU. It's quite obvious that we can't have a situation based on business as usual as long as this aggression continues. Sometimes you hear that geopolitics is back in town. Well, it might be so, but we can't afford to change the policy of values to the policy of geopolitics, because the old policy of geopolitics is gone in Europe. It's not a viable recipe for the future. The whole European Union is based on values and the very simple fact that if a nation wants to choose a certain path economically or security-wise, they should be free to do it. And we can't change the nature of the European Union. We can never enter the path of geopolitics and deal with nations' future as one could do 100 years ago. So even if some says that geopolitics is back in town, that could never be the case for the European Union. And for us, the alternative is to try to build a positive relationship with the Russia that stops being aggressive towards his neighbors. It is a time-consuming and mentally quite tiresome task for many of the European leaders. I think everyone knows it. But it's the only way to preserve peace. It's the only way to secure the nations and the people's means to decide their own future and to decide to choose their own way to live. We will not give up the principles of the Helsinki Treaty. We will not give up the principles of the Council of Europe. We will not give up the basis of the foundation of the security regime in this part of the world. This is not an option for us. And I think it's wise for Kremlin to understand that it isn't an option. People like Mr. Dugin, he must have his old-fashioned ideas, but he will never have a serious voice here in Brussels. Having said that, I think it's also important for us to note that there are voices in the European debate that says that European values are actually guarded by Mr. Putin in Kremlin. I think it's very, very important for us, being a part of the democratic and free Europe, to say that this is not an acceptable path for Europe. We must take sometimes also the fight with the illiberal voices in our own countries. But I'm quite sure that we will win this fight, just as I'm sure that in the final end, Ukrainians will win their fight for their true independence and the right to choose their own path. Thank you, welcome, and now let's have an interesting evening.